The motel sign flickered in the darkness, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked asphalt. I pulled my car into the lot, engine rattling, headlights barely piercing the thick mist that clung to the ground. The building itself looked tired, peeling paint, warped siding, a row of doors that seemed to sag under the weight of too many secrets. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the silence. No traffic, no crickets, just the distant hum of the highway and the wind scraping against the sign. I needed this job, but as I stepped out, the air felt colder than it should have been. Inside, the lobby was cramped and dim, the only light coming from a desk lamp with a cracked shade. The manager, a gaunt man with deep-set eyes, barely looked up as I entered. "You're late," he muttered, sliding a battered key across the counter. "Front desk all night. Don't leave the lobby. Don't answer the phone after midnight." Before I could ask why, the other clerk, a woman in her 20s, eyes darting to the clock, hurried past me, muttering, "Good luck." She didn't look back. The manager's instructions were clipped, almost rehearsed. "Clean up after yourself. Don't go into room 6. If anyone asks for the guest book, say it's missing." He handed me a logbook, stained and dog-eared, then turned away, already halfway out the door. "Lock up at 11. I'll be back at dawn." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the stale, humming quiet. I stood behind the counter, heart thumping, staring at the empty lobby. The pay was almost too good for a job like this. I wondered what they weren't telling me, and why everyone seemed so desperate to get away before night truly fell. I tried to shake off the chill as I settled behind the front desk, glancing around for anything that might make the place feel less like a mausoleum. The computer was ancient, the screen flickering with every keystroke. A battered phone sat beside it, its cord twisted and frayed. The wall behind me was lined with keys, each one tagged with a faded number. I found a checklist taped to the counter, wiped down the lobby, restocked the coffee, checked the vending machine, and logged any late arrivals. The tasks were simple enough, but the silence pressed in, making every sound, my footsteps, the hum of the fridge, the distant creak of pipes, seem unnaturally loud. I busied myself with the routine, wiping down the counter and straightening the stack of local maps. As I reached for a stray pen, my hand brushed against something wedged between the register and the wall. I pulled it free, an old, leather-bound guest book, its cover cracked and stained. The pages were thick, yellowed with age, and as I flipped through, I saw names and dates scrawled in shaky handwriting. Some entries were crossed out, others smeared as if someone had tried to erase them. Near the middle, a page stuck to my fingers. I pried it open and froze. There, in a rusty, dark red, dried blood, I realized with a jolt, someone had written a list of rules. The handwriting was frantic, the letters jagged and uneven. Never check in a guest after 2:13 a.m. If a guest in room 4 asks for extra towels, refuse politely and lock the supply closet. Do not enter room 6, no matter what you hear. If the phone rings after midnight, do not answer. If you see a child in the parking lot, do not let them inside. The vending machine must be restocked before 3 a.m., never after. If a guest book page is missing in the morning, burn it. My skin prickled as I read the list again, the words sinking in. Who wrote these? Was this some kind of sick joke, or a warning left by someone before me? I glanced at the clock, 11:17 p.m. The night was just beginning, and already I felt the weight of every shadow in the room. I tucked the guest book under the counter, heart pounding. The rules felt like a dare, a challenge I hadn't agreed to. What would happen if I ignored them? I looked at the empty lobby, the row of keys, the silent phone. I told myself it was just a prank, a leftover from some bored clerk. But as the wind rattled the windows and the neon sign buzzed outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that the rules were watching me, waiting for me to slip. I tried to focus on the checklist, telling myself that routine was the best defense against nerves. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the bitter scent filling the lobby, and restocked the sugar packets with hands that only trembled a little. The vending machine in the hallway was nearly empty, so I wheeled out a crate of snacks and sodas, slotting them into place one by one. The hum of the machine was oddly comforting, a reminder that some things still worked the way they were supposed to. The clock ticked past midnight. I wiped down the lobby chairs, straightened the stack of local takeout menus, and checked the reservation log. Only 3 rooms were occupied tonight: Room 2, Room 4, and Room 8. I wondered about the people behind those closed doors, what brought them to a place like this in the middle of nowhere. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional groan of the building settling or the distant rush of a passing truck on the highway. Then the lights flickered. Just once, a quick stutter, but enough to make me pause. I glanced up, heart skipping, but the bulb steadied. Probably just old wiring, I told myself. I went back to the desk, tapping at the computer to check for any late online bookings. The screen glitched, lines of static racing across the display before it returned to normal. I frowned, making a mental note to mention it to the manager in the morning. A little after 1, the bell above the lobby door jingled. I looked up, expecting to see a tired traveler, but the man who entered was already a guest, Room 4, if I remember right. He was tall, with a heavy coat and a face that seemed both familiar and wrong. As if I'd seen him in a dream I couldn't quite recall. He didn't meet my eyes, just shuffled to the counter and asked, voice flat, "Can I get some extra towels?" My mind flashed to the rules. If a guest in Room 4 asks for extra towels, refuse politely and lock the supply closet. I hesitated, then forced a smile. "Sorry, the laundry's locked up for the night. I can get you some in the morning." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable, then turned and walked back down the hall without another word. I watched him go, unease prickling at the back of my neck. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, making me jump. Midnight had come and gone. I let it ring, counting each shrill note, until it finally stopped. I tried to laugh at myself, but the sound died in my throat. I finished the rest of my tasks, but the sense of normalcy was gone. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights, every shadow in the corners felt loaded with meaning. I told myself it was just nerves, just the power of suggestion. But as I sat behind the desk, the guest book hidden beneath my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was only just beginning to show its true face. By 2 in the morning, my nerves had settled into a dull ache. I kept glancing at the guest book, half expecting the words to rearrange themselves or bleed through the page. The rules felt ridiculous, but the memory of Room 4's request and the way the man's eyes lingered on me made it hard to dismiss them entirely. Still, I told myself this was just a job. People made up stories to pass the time, to scare the new guy. I wasn't about to let a list of creepy warnings dictate my night. A soft knock echoed from the end of the hallway. I checked the clock, 2:09 a.m. The rules said nothing about knocks, only about not checking in guests after 2:13. I hesitated, then grabbed the spare key and walked down the corridor, the carpet muffling my steps. The knock came again, gentle but insistent, from room 8. I remembered the reservation, a woman traveling alone, checked in just before my shift started. I tapped lightly. Is everything okay in there? No answer. I knocked again, a little louder. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for me to see the edge of the bed and a suitcase on the floor. Ma'am, I called, but the room was silent. I pushed the door open a little farther, peering inside. The bed was made, the suitcase still zipped, but the room was empty. No sign of the guest. The bathroom door was open, the light off. I stepped back, uneasy, and closed the door, locking it behind me. As I turned to head back, I caught a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall. A shadow, too tall and thin to be a person, slipped around the corner and vanished. My heart hammered in my chest. I hurried back to the lobby, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a product of too little sleep and too much imagination. Back at the desk, I checked the logbook. The woman's name was still there, but something was off. The ink looked smeared, as if someone had tried to rub it away. I flipped to the rules, reading them again, searching for anything I might have missed. My hands shook as I realized I'd bent the rules, even if only a little. I hadn't broken any outright, but I'd ignored the warning to leave certain things alone. The rest of the motel was silent, but the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I sat behind the desk, eyes fixed on the hallway, waiting for another knock, another shadow, another test. The rules suddenly felt less like a joke and more like a line I'd crossed without meaning to. I wondered what would happen if I broke another, and if I'd even see the next warning before it was too late. The clock on the wall ticked past 2:30 a.m. I tried to keep busy, but my mind kept circling back to the empty room and the shadow I'd seen. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the woman in room 8 had just stepped out for a smoke or a walk, but the silence in the hallway was absolute. I checked the parking lot through the front window. Her car was still there, glistening with dew under the flickering sign. I was about to return to the desk when the phone rang, slicing through the quiet. I froze. The rules were clear. If the phone rings after midnight, do not answer. But the sound was so sharp, so urgent, that I hesitated. Maybe it was the manager or a guest in trouble. Maybe it was nothing. The phone kept ringing, each shrill note digging deeper into my nerves. Against my better judgment, I picked up the receiver. "Front desk," I said, voice barely steady. Static crackled on the line. Then a voice, distorted, echoing, almost familiar. "Room 6. Let me out." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Room 6. The rule I'd dismissed as a joke. Do not enter room 6, no matter what you hear. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in my throat. I set the phone down, hands shaking, and forced myself to breathe. A moment later, a loud bang echoed from down the hall. I jumped to my feet, adrenaline surging. The sound came again, louder, as if someone or something was pounding on a door. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and crept down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The banging grew frantic, desperate, coming from behind the door to room 6. I stopped a few feet away, the beam of my flashlight trembling. The door rattled in its frame, hinges groaning. "Help me!" A voice wailed from inside, high and thin, like a child's. "Please, let me out. It's so dark here." The voice shifted, deepening, twisting into something inhuman. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." I stumbled back, every instinct screaming at me to run. But the door burst open, slamming against the wall. The hallway filled with a freezing wind, carrying the stench of rot and old blood. Something stepped out, a shape that flickered between forms, sometimes a child, sometimes a woman, sometimes a thing with too many limbs and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. I turned and ran, the thing's footsteps pounding behind me. The lights overhead flickered and died, plunging the hallway into shadow. I could hear it breathing, feel its cold presence at my back. I reached the lobby and slammed the door shut, fumbling for the lock. The thing threw itself against the wood, howling, but the door held. I collapsed behind the desk, gasping for air. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I waited, heart racing, until the first hint of light crept under the door. When I finally dared to look, the hallway was empty. The door to room 6 hung open, swinging gently in the draft. I crawled to my feet, every muscle aching. The rules weren't a joke. They were a warning, a lifeline. I stared at the guest book, the blood-red writing, and knew with absolute certainty that if I wanted to survive the night, I would have to follow every rule, no matter how strange, no matter how impossible. The motel was alive with secrets, and I was trapped inside with them. When the pounding in my chest finally slowed, I forced myself to move. I needed answers, anything to make sense of what I'd just seen. The lobby felt colder, the shadows deeper, but I couldn't sit behind the desk and wait for the next horror to find me. I remembered the battered filing cabinet in the back office, the one the manager had warned me not to bother with. I slipped behind the counter, heart thudding, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, I found a jumble of old paperwork, yellowed receipts, and a stack of local newspapers. I thumbed through them, searching for anything that might explain the rules or the thing in room 6. One headline caught my eye: "Motel clerk missing, no leads and disappearance." The article was dated 5 years ago. The clerk's name was scrawled in the guest book, one of the entries that had been crossed out. There were more clippings, strange accidents, unexplained fires, guests who checked in but never checked out. Each story ended the same way. No answers, no bodies, just rumors and fear. I dug deeper, finding a dusty VHS tape labeled Security, March 1999. The motel's security system was ancient, but the VCR in the office still worked. I slid the tape in and pressed play. The footage was grainy, black and white, but I could make out the lobby, the desk, the same battered guest book sitting in plain view. The clerk on the tape looked tired, eyes darting to the clock. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the front door opened and a figure stepped inside, tall, face hidden in shadow. The clerk stood, hesitated, then handed over the guest book. The figure took it, opened it, and began to write. The tape flickered, static filling the screen, and when the image returned, the clerk was gone. The guest book sat open, a fresh line of blood-red writing staining the page. I rewound the tape, watching the moment again and again, but the details never changed. The guest book was always at the center, always waiting for the next name, the next rule. I wondered how many clerks had sat here before me, how many had vanished into the motel's hungry silence. Desperate for a living voice, I scanned the reservation log and found a name that had appeared for 3 nights in a row: Mr. Harlan, room 2. I knocked softly, and after a long pause, the door opened a crack. Harlan was old, with watery eyes and a voice like gravel. "You're the new clerk," he said, not a question. "You found the book, didn't you?" I nodded, and he sighed. "It's always the book. The rules keep the worst of it at bay, but they're not perfect. The blood? That's from the first owner. He tried to burn the place down, but the motel wouldn't let him leave. Now it wants names, and it wants rules. Break them, and it takes something in return. I thanked him, but his door was already closing. Back in the lobby, I stared at the guest book, the blood-dark rules, and realized I was just the latest in a long line of clerks, each one trying to survive until dawn. The motel had a memory, and it was written in blood. The clock on the wall seemed to slow, each minute stretching into an hour. I sat behind the desk, the guest book open in front of me, the rules burned into my mind. My earlier skepticism had vanished, replaced by a gnawing fear that made my skin crawl. I kept replaying the old man's words. The rules keep the worst of it at bay, but they're not perfect, and wondered what counted as the worst. I didn't want to find out. The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the lobby into darkness before sputtering back to life. I checked the vending machine, remembering the rule about restocking before 3 a.m. My hands shook as I loaded the last of the sodas, glancing over my shoulder at every sound. The machine's hum seemed louder, almost angry, and I finished as quickly as I could, slamming the door shut just as the clock struck 2:59. A knock rattled the glass of the front door. I looked up, heart pounding. A child stood outside, barefoot, hair plastered to her face by the rain. She stared at me, eyes wide and unblinking. The rules were clear. If you see a child in the parking lot, do not let them inside. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to help, but I stayed behind the counter, watching as she pressed her hand to the glass, leaving a smear that looked too dark to be water. She mouthed something, please, but I shook my head, backing away. She lingered for a moment, then faded into the mist, her outline dissolving as if she'd never been there at all. The phone rang again, shrill and insistent. I ignored it, but the sound burrowed into my skull, each ring a reminder of how thin the line was between safety and disaster. I unplugged the phone, but it kept ringing, the noise echoing from somewhere deeper in the motel. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew louder, more desperate. A guest stumbled into the lobby, room 4, the man with the heavy coat. His face was pale, eyes wild. There's something in my room, he whispered, voice trembling. It's in the walls. It keeps whispering my name. He grabbed my arm, fingers icy cold. You have to help me. I remembered the rule about room 4 and towels, but nothing about this. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Please, he begged, just come look. Just for a second. I shook my head, fear rising in my throat. I can't. I'm sorry. He stared at me, then let go, stumbling back down the hall, muttering to himself. The power flickered again, then died completely. The lobby was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the neon sign outside, its glow barely reaching the front desk. I fumbled for the flashlight, the beam slicing through the shadows. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the motel itself was closing in around me. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I shone the light, but the beam seemed to bend, refusing to illuminate whatever was coming. The footsteps stopped just outside the lobby, and I held my breath, waiting. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of rain against the windows. I realized then how much I'd changed in just a few hours. The rules I'd mocked were now my only protection. Every decision felt like a test, every moment a chance to make a fatal mistake. Paranoia gnawed at me, but I clung to the rules, repeating them under my breath like a prayer. The night was far from over, and I knew the worst was still to come. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. I clutched the flashlight, its beam flickering as if the batteries were dying, though I'd just checked them. The silence was broken by a sudden, frantic pounding on the lobby door. I spun around, heart hammering, and saw the man from room 4, his face twisted in terror, eyes wide and pleading. "Please, let me in. It's coming, it's coming," he screamed, slamming his fists against the glass. I hesitated, the rules echoing in my mind. Don't check in guests after 2:13 a.m., don't let the child inside. But this wasn't a new guest, and he was desperate, human, terrified. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. The moment the door swung open, he stumbled inside, collapsing at my feet, sobbing. Thank you," he gasped, clutching my leg. The air changed instantly. The temperature dropped, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from the hallway. The shadows seemed to pulse, growing thicker, darker, as if alive. The doors to the guest rooms began to slam, one after another, echoing down the corridor. The man scrambled to his feet, backing away from the sound, his eyes darting wildly. A shape emerged from the darkness, a tall, shifting figure, its limbs too long, its face a blur of features that never settled. It glided toward us, silent except for the wet, dragging sound of its feet on the carpet. The man screamed and bolted for the back exit, but the door slammed shut before he could reach it. He pounded on it, begging for help, but the thing was already upon him. I watched, frozen, as the shadow enveloped him, his screams muffled, then silenced. I stumbled backward, tripping over the guest book. The rules glared up at me, the blood-red writing seeming to pulse with anger. I'd broken a rule. I'd let someone in when I shouldn't have. The motel was punishing me. The lights flickered back on, but they were dim, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The walls seemed to breathe, bulging inward as if the building itself was alive. Doors slammed open and shut, shadows darted across the floor, and the air was filled with whispers, my name, over and over, in voices I recognized and feared. I ran, the guest book clutched to my chest, dodging grasping hands that reached from the darkness. The hallways twisted, becoming unfamiliar, endless. I tried every door, but each one led to another corridor, another nightmare. The motel was a maze, and I was the prey. A child's laughter echoed behind me, high and cold. I turned a corner and nearly collided with the girl from the parking lot. Her eyes were black, her smile too wide. "You broke the rules," she whispered, reaching for me with blood-stained hands. I shoved past her, heart pounding, and burst into the supply closet. I slammed the door and braced it with my body, gasping for breath. The whispers grew louder, the walls closing in. I stared at the guest book, desperate for a way out, for a rule I hadn't broken, for hope. The motel shook, the floor buckling beneath me. I realized then that the rules weren't just for me. They were for the building, for whatever lived inside it. I'd failed, and now the night was coming for me. All I could do was hold on, pray for dawn, and hope that I'd survive long enough to see the sun rise over the highway, to escape the motel's hungry grasp. The supply closet was suffocating, the air thick with dust and the coppery tang of fear. I pressed my back against the door, feeling it shudder as something heavy thudded against the other side. The guest book trembled in my hands, the blood-dark rules seeming to writhe on the page. My mind raced, searching for a way out, for a loophole, for anything I'd missed. The motel was alive with rage, every broken rule a wound that bled into the walls. A voice slithered through the crack beneath the door, soft, coaxing, in the tone of my mother. "Let me in, sweetheart. It's cold out here. You don't want to be alone." I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to answer, to open the door and surrender. The rules echoed in my mind. Do not answer the phone after midnight. Do not let the child inside. Do not enter room 6. Each one a line drawn in blood, a boundary between survival and oblivion. The pounding stopped. Silence pressed in, heavier than before. I opened my eyes and saw a new line scrawled in the guest book, the ink still wet and glistening. A sacrifice must be made. My breath caught. The motel wanted payment. It always had. I thought of the man from room 4, his terror, his pleading. I thought of the girl in the parking lot, her black eyes and crimson smile. I thought of myself, alone and desperate, clinging to a book of rules written by the lost and the damned. The entity behind the rules was close. I could feel it, a cold presence just beyond the door, waiting for me to choose. I flipped through the guest book, searching for patterns, for stories of those who'd survived. One entry stood out, written in a shaky hand. If you burn a page, the night resets. But the price is memory. I tore out the most recent page, the one with my name, and fumbled for the lighter I'd found in the lost and found box. My hands shook as I flicked the flame to life, holding it to the edge of the paper. The page curled, blackening, the blood-red ink bubbling and hissing. The motel screamed, a sound that rattled the shelves and sent bottles tumbling to the floor. Shadows writhed beneath the door, clawing at the crack, but I held the burning page until it was nothing but ash. The world lurched. The pounding stopped. The whispers faded. I staggered to my feet, dizzy, the guest book heavy in my arms. I opened it and found my name gone, erased as if I'd never been there. Relief flooded me, but it was hollow, tinged with loss. I tried to remember my mother's face, the sound of my own laughter, but the memories slipped through my fingers like smoke. The door creaked open, and the entity stood before me, tall, shifting, its face a blur of all the guests who'd ever vanished. It regarded me with something like respect, then stepped aside, gesturing toward the lobby. I walked past it, numb, the guest book clutched to my chest. The motel was silent, the chaos gone. The doors hung open, the hallways empty. I stepped into the lobby and saw the first light of dawn creeping through the windows. The entity faded into the shadows, leaving me alone with the book and the knowledge that I'd survived, but not unchanged. I had made a sacrifice. The motel was satisfied for now, but I knew, deep down, that the rules would remain, waiting for the next desperate soul to stumble in from the highway, searching for shelter and finding only the price of survival. The first rays of sunlight crept across the lobby floor, painting the cracked tiles gold. I stood behind the desk, the guest book closed and heavy in my hands, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I'd survived. My memories were patchwork, faces blurred, laughter hollow, the edges of my own life frayed and uncertain. I watched the parking lot fill with light, the mist dissolving, the world outside returning to normal as if the night's horrors had never happened. The front door swung open. The manager strode in, his expression unchanged, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment. He glanced at me, then at the guest book, and nodded. "You made it," he said, voice flat. "Not everyone does." He took the book from my hands, flipping through the pages with practiced indifference. "You'll find things missing," he added, not looking up. "That's the price. The motel always takes something." I wanted to ask him why, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. He set the guest book on the counter and slid a new logbook toward me. "There'll be another clerk tonight. You can stay if you want, or you can leave. But if you stay, you follow the rules. If you leave, you never look back." I stared at the door, the empty highway beyond. Freedom so close I could taste it. But I thought of the next person who would sit behind this desk, the next desperate soul who'd find the rules written in blood. I hesitated, torn between warning them and running from this place forever. The manager watched me, eyes cold and knowing. "The rules keep the worst at bay," he said quietly. "But the motel's hungry. It always finds a way." I stepped outside, the sun warm on my face, the air sharp with the promise of escape. But as I walked to my car, I glanced back at the motel, its windows dark and watchful. I wondered if the cycle would ever end, or if the price of survival was simply to become another shadow in the guest book, another name lost to the night.